My parents canceled my surgery just so my sister could afford a vacation. I was left shocked and helpless, but their selfish plan backfired in a way they never expected. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how my parents' favoritism toward my sister Rachel ended up costing them everything they held dear. For context, I'm 28 now and Rachel is 26. Ever since we were kids, she was the golden girl, straight-A student, homecoming queen, full scholarship to college, the whole package. I was the difficult one, the daughter with chronic health problems, mediocre grades, and apparently not enough charm or sparkle to earn the same attention. I was born with a severe spinal deformity called kyphoscoliosis, which basically means my spine curves in two directions at once, creating a hunched appearance and pressing against my internal organs. By the time I turned 25, the condition had advanced so much that breathing properly became a struggle, and even something as simple as climbing a set of stairs left me gasping for air. My cardiologist told me flat out that without corrective surgery, my heart would probably fail within 5 years. This wasn't about vanity. The operation was literally a fight for my life. The plan was to insert titanium rods along my spine to straighten it out and ease the crushing pressure on my heart and lungs. After months of consultations, preparation, and wrestling with insurance approvals, the surgery was finally scheduled for March 15, 2022. The total cost came to about $180,000, but insurance would handle most of it. My parents only needed to contribute around $15,000. Everything was in place. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job as a library technician, lined up help for recovery, and braced myself mentally for a grueling 6-month healing period. Then, just 2 weeks before the surgery, Rachel dropped her bombshell. She and her fiancé David had found their dream wedding venue in Tuscany, but the catch was they had to put down a $25,000 deposit immediately to lock it in, and the wedding was set for April, only a month after my operation. Rachel came crying to our parents about how this was her once-in-a-lifetime chance, how she'd never forgive herself if she let it slip away. I remember that family meeting like it happened this morning. We were all in my parents' living room, Dad sitting in his recliner, Mom on the couch right next to Rachel, and me stuck in the stiff wooden chair because it hurt my back the least. Rachel was full-on sobbing, explaining how David's family was pressuring them about the wedding, and how this venue was literally perfect, something they'd never find again. "We just need to borrow the money for a few months," she pleaded, glancing between our parents with those big blue eyes that had always gotten her everything she wanted. "David gets his bonus in July and will pay you back with interest, I swear." Dad was nodding before she even finished. "Of course, sweetheart. We can't let you miss out on your dream wedding." That's when Mom delivered the gut punch. "Emily, honey, we're going to need to postpone your surgery for a few months. We'll reschedule once Rachel pays us back." I sat there stunned, certain I'd misheard. "Postpone my surgery? Mom, we've been planning this for 8 months. The surgical team is booked. I've rearranged my entire life around this date." "It's just a few months," Dad said without even looking at me. "Your surgery isn't going anywhere. Rachel's wedding date can't be changed." "My surgery can't be changed either," I said, standing up even though my back screamed in protest. "Dr. Hayes warned me that delaying this could be dangerous. My heart is already under strain." Rachel gave me a look of mild annoyance. "Emily, don't be dramatic. It's just a few months. My wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. And my life is a once-in-a-lifetime thing too." I shot back, my voice rising. "I could die if we wait too long." My mother let out an exasperated sigh like I was being difficult. "The doctor said you have up to 5 years. A few months won't make a difference." But I knew it would. Dr. Hayes had been watching my condition closely, and the decline was accelerating. Every month of delay meant the dangers of surgery and recovery would only climb higher. At 25, my body could still withstand the shock of such an invasive procedure, but by the time I'd be 26 or 27, with the condition getting worse, the risks would skyrocket. I tried laying this out for my parents, but they had already decided. Rachel's wedding mattered more to them than my survival. The $15,000 they had set aside for my operation was being funneled into her fairy tale wedding in Italy. The cruelest part was that they didn't even seem to understand why I was devastated. "You're being selfish," my mom told me as I grabbed my bag to leave. "This is your sister's special day. Family stands together." I drove back to my cramped studio apartment, tears blurring my vision, my chest aching from more than just the strain of my condition. The next morning I called Dr. Hayes's office to explain what happened. His nurse was kind but firm. If we canceled now, the earliest slot wouldn't be until September, maybe even later, and with how serious my case was, waiting that long wasn't recommended. That was when I made the choice that changed everything. I wasn't about to let my parents' favoritism literally kill me. I had maybe $3,000 in savings and a credit card with a $10,000 limit. Not nearly enough to cover the surgery, but at least a starting point. I dove into researching medical loans, programs for uninsured patients, and even the possibility of going abroad for treatment. But every option looked either too risky or flat out impossible. Then I remembered my Aunt Karen, my dad's sister. She had always been the odd one out, moving to California to chase a career as a screenwriter instead of following the straight-laced path my grandparents demanded. My dad barely spoke to her, but she and I had kept in touch through social media and the occasional phone call. Karen had carved out a decent life in Hollywood. She wasn't wealthy, but she was comfortable. And more importantly, she had always treated Rachel and me the same. When I called and explained everything, she was livid. "They're canceling your life-saving surgery for a wedding," she snapped. "Emily, I'm so sorry. Your parents have completely lost it." I broke down, sobbing into the phone about how terrified and alone I felt. Karen listened quietly, then made an offer that truly saved my life. "I'll lend you the money," she said without hesitation. "All of it. Whatever you need. We'll work out the details later, but right now you just need this surgery." I was crying too hard to answer. "Karen, I can't let you do that. It's $15,000. "You didn't ask," she interrupted. "I offered. And Emily? Don't tell your parents I helped. Let them believe you figured it out yourself." Thanks to her, I was able to keep the original surgery date. I called Dr. Hayes's office and confirmed everything was still in place, then updated my job to reconfirm my medical leave. I didn't breathe a word to my parents. The night before surgery, my mom called to check in. "How are you holding up with the postponement, honey? I know it must be disappointing." "Actually, Mom, the surgery's still happening tomorrow," I said. There was a long silence. "What do you mean?" "We already agreed. We don't have the money." "I found another way to cover it. I'll be in the operating room at 7 in the morning." Another pause, and then I heard my dad's voice in the background. "Who's paying for it?" "I handled it myself," I said evenly. "You don't need to worry." "Emily, you can't possibly have that kind of money," Mom said, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Where did you get $15,000? "That's not your concern anymore," I replied. "You made it clear Rachel's wedding mattered more than my health, so I found another way." Mom started to say something else, but I hung up. I had 12 hours before surgery, and I needed to focus on saving my life, not their misplaced priorities. And then, the next morning, the surgery went perfectly. Dr. Hayes and his team spent 8 long hours straightening out my spine and securing it with titanium rods that would quite literally give me my life back. When I finally woke up in recovery, the very first thing I noticed was how much easier it was to breathe. My lungs could fully expand for the first time in years. Aunt Karen flew in from California to be by my side, taking 2 full weeks off work to help me through the hardest part of recovery. Her kindness during that time is something I'll never forget. My parents, on the other hand, showed up exactly once. They brought flowers, stayed for a short and awkward visit, and pretended like nothing had happened. "We're so glad everything worked out," Mom said while fussing with the vase. "See? We told you it would all be fine." I just stared at her in disbelief. "You told me to delay life-saving surgery for a wedding. The only reason I'm alive is because someone else stepped up when you wouldn't." Dad shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, it all worked out for the best. Rachel's wedding is going to be beautiful, and you had your surgery. Everyone's happy." "Everyone's not happy, Dad. I'm alive in spite of you, not because of you." They left soon after that, and I didn't hear from them again until the wedding chaos began. About 2 weeks into my recovery, I got a frantic call from Rachel. The Tuscany venue had collapsed. It turned out to be a scam operation that vanished with deposits from dozens of couples. Rachel and David had lost their entire $25,000. "Emily, you have to help me," she sobbed into the phone. "The wedding is in 6 weeks and we have nothing." No venue, no catering, nothing. Mom and Dad already gave us everything they could. I let her cry while I sat there, torn between sympathy and a sharp flicker of satisfaction. I'm sorry that happened, Rachel. That really sucks. Can you loan us some money? Just until David gets his bonus? We're family. I almost laughed. Rachel, I'm recovering from major spinal surgery. I've been out of work for 2 months and I won't be cleared for another 4. I don't have anything to give you. But you found money for your surgery somehow. Can't you ask whoever helped you? No, I can't. And even if I could, I wouldn't. You, Mom, and Dad made it crystal clear your wedding mattered more than my life. Now you'll have to live with that decision. She was quiet for a beat before her voice turned icy. You're really going to hold a grudge over this? It's my wedding, Emily. And it was my life, Rachel. You don't get to come to me for help after choosing a party over my survival. I hung up and realized I couldn't let her keep pulling me back in. I called our cousin Megan, who still kept in touch with Rachel, and asked her not to pass along any more calls. A few hours later, Rachel rang me again from Megan's number, crying just as hard. She repeated the same desperate plea, but I gave her the same answer. I couldn't help her, and even if I could, I wouldn't. After that, I told Megan not to let Rachel use her phone to reach me anymore. I was done being the family doormat. Over the next few weeks, word trickled back to me through friends that Rachel and David were scrambling to salvage their plans. They eventually settled on a small ceremony at a local church, followed by a modest reception in a budget hotel ballroom. It wasn't the dream wedding in Italy Rachel had built up in her head, but it was all they could afford with what David had left in savings. My parents, meanwhile, were furious with me. They left voicemail after voicemail accusing me of being selfish, of ruining Rachel's big day, of refusing to help family. According to them, I was petty and vindictive. But the real fallout hadn't even started yet. About 3 months after my surgery, right when I was finally walking on my own again and preparing to return to work, my dad called. His voice trembled, and he sounded older and more defeated than I'd ever heard him. Emily, we need to talk. Can you come over? Is everything okay? I asked. Just, can you come? Please. Against my better judgment, I drove over to their house, curiosity and a flicker of worry gnawing at me despite everything that had happened. When I arrived, both of them were at the kitchen table, stacks of paper spread everywhere. Mom's eyes were red from crying, and Dad looked like he'd aged a decade since the last time I'd seen him. What's going on? I asked, sitting across from them. Dad took a shaky breath. We're losing the house. I stared at him. What do you mean losing the house? We took out a second mortgage to pay for Rachel's wedding, Mom whispered. We thought David would pay us back in July like he promised, but what? I demanded. He lost his job, Dad said, his voice flat. The company had layoffs. He was let go 2 weeks after they got back from the honeymoon. He's been searching for something else, but nothing comes close to what he was making before. They can't pay us back. A cold weight settled in my stomach. How much did you borrow? Dad looked down at his hands. $50,000. Rachel said they needed more for the new wedding arrangements after the venue fell through, and we wanted to make sure she still had something nice. 50,000? I echoed. They had risked their home, the house they'd lived in for 30 years, the house I'd grown up in, to fund Rachel's wedding. The same wedding they'd chosen over my life-saving surgery. The payments are $1,800 a month, Mom added, wiping at her face. We can't handle that on just our retirement income. We've been trying for 3 months, but we're already behind. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. These were the same people who had drilled financial responsibility and planning for the future into me, and they had gambled their security on a party. And now they were losing everything. What does Rachel say about all this? I asked finally. They exchanged a look. She says it's not her fault David lost his job, Mom said quietly. She says we shouldn't have loaned them money we couldn't afford. The irony almost made me laugh. Rachel, who had manipulated them into prioritizing her wedding over my surgery, was now washing her hands of responsibility when the consequences hit. So what do you want from me? I asked, though I already suspected. We were hoping. Mom started, then stopped. Your Aunt Karen. She helped you with your surgery. Do you think she might? No, I said firmly, cutting her off. Absolutely not. Emily, please, Dad said. We're desperate. We'll lose everything. I stood up, my back straight and strong for the first time in years thanks to the very surgery they had tried to stop. Let me get this straight. You risked your house to pay for Rachel's wedding, the same wedding you prioritized over my life-saving procedure. And now that your gamble blew up, you want me to ask the person who saved my life to save your house too? Dad winced. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible. It sounds terrible because it is terrible, I said. You made your choice and now you're living with it. Just like you expected me to live with mine when you canceled my surgery. That's different, Mom protested. Your surgery could have been postponed. Could it? I shot back. Because Dr. Hayes told me my condition was deteriorating faster than expected. If I had waited until September like you wanted, the surgery would have been far more dangerous. I could have died on the table, or been paralyzed for life. But that was a risk you were willing to take for Rachel's wedding. The words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time I think they began to grasp the enormity of what they had almost cost me. I'm not asking Karen for money, I said firmly. She already saved one member of this family. It's not her responsibility to bail the rest of you out of your own reckless decisions. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. But I'll give you the same advice you gave me when I was staring down a life-or-death situation. Family supports family, right? Maybe Rachel can step in and help you this time. Then I left them sitting there at the kitchen table, surrounded by foreclosure notices and the ruins of their financial security. Over the next several weeks, I watched from a distance as everything unraveled. Rachel and David couldn't contribute to the mortgage, he was still unemployed, and her paycheck as a marketing coordinator barely covered their rent. My parents scrambled to refinance, begged for loan modifications, tried every avenue they could think of, but their credit was shot and they were already too far behind. For months later, the foreclosure was final. My parents, who had owned their house free and clear only a year earlier, were forced to pack up and move into a cramped two-bedroom apartment across town. They sold off most of their furniture, liquidated Dad's pride and joy, the classic Mustang he'd spent years restoring, and raided their retirement fund just to afford deposits and moving costs. Seeing them lose everything was brutal, but what really gutted me was stumbling across their yard sale one Saturday. I happened to be driving by and saw strangers picking through 30 years of our family's belongings laid out on the lawn. Dad's treasured golf clubs. Mom's china cabinet that had belonged to her mother. Family portraits still in ornate frames now going for a few dollars apiece. I parked my car and sat there, watching as Dad tried to convince someone his vintage record collection was worth more than $5, only to have the buyer shrug and walk away. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment my chest tightened with pity. But then I remembered sitting in that same driveway years earlier, sobbing in my car after they canceled my surgery, and the sympathy drained away. Rachel, unsurprisingly, was nowhere to be found. Word through the grapevine was that she and David were too busy to help with the move. My guess? She just couldn't stomach facing the fallout of her choices. She'd had her wedding, but the cost was staggering. Her parents now living in an apartment smaller than her first starter place, surrounded by whatever scraps of their old life they could salvage. The building was in a rough neighborhood, the kind they used to sneer at when driving past. The walls were paper thin, the parking lot pitted with potholes, and the halls reeked of trash left by careless neighbors who blasted music at all hours. A far cry from the suburban house with the manicured lawn and quiet cul-de-sac. A few weeks after they settled in, Mom called me under the guise of checking in, but really she just wanted to gripe about the apartment. The people upstairs stomp around all night, she huffed, her voice pinched with irritation. And someone keeps stealing our mail. Your father barely gets any sleep. I murmured the right sympathetic responses, but inside I couldn't help comparing their complaints to the years I spent lying awake in agony, unable to rest because my bent spine made every position unbearable. I thought about all the times I had to miss out on life because breathing itself left me drained. Where was their compassion then? We never should have left that house, Mom continued bitterly. 30 years we lived there. 30 years making it perfect. And now some investor swooped in and bought it at auction for half of what we owed. They're probably going to flip it and make a fortune. Why did you take out the second mortgage, Mom? I asked even though deep down I already knew the answer. I just wanted to hear her say it out loud. There was a long pause before she whispered, We thought David would pay us back quickly. Rachel said his bonus was guaranteed. We were just trying to help. No, I said evenly. You were trying to help Rachel. You weren't thinking about how it would affect your own security. That's what parents do, Emily. We sacrifice for our children. No, Mom. That's what you do for Rachel. When I needed you to sacrifice for me, you chose her instead. She hung up after that, but the next day she called back to apologize. That became the pattern. Mom would ring me up to vent about their struggles. Then in the middle of her complaints she'd let slip something that showed just how differently they treated Rachel versus me. And afterward, guilt would make her call again with an apology. Meanwhile, my own life was blossoming. By the 6-month mark after surgery, I wasn't just back to normal. I was stronger and more active than I'd ever been. The chronic pain that had been my constant companion for years was gone, replaced with a level of strength and mobility I hadn't known was possible. I started hiking trails, signed up for yoga classes, and even began dating. Something I never had the confidence to do when my condition was both visible and limiting. The physical changes were astonishing. For the first time in my adult life, I could stand tall without pain. I could draw deep breaths without my ribs feeling crushed. I could wear clothes that actually fit instead of trying to hide the curve in my back. But the emotional transformation was even greater. For years, I had thought of myself as the broken daughter, the one with problems that everyone else had to work around. My whole identity revolved around being sick, being limited, being less. The surgery didn't just straighten my spine. It shattered those old beliefs and gave me the chance to rebuild myself from the ground up. I even enrolled in dance classes, something I had always dreamed of but never thought possible. The instructor, a patient woman named Maria, worked with me to modify moves at first, but as the weeks passed, I needed fewer and fewer adjustments. My body was doing things I had never dared imagine. That new confidence spilled into every corner of my life. At work, I earned a promotion to senior technician, stepping into projects that demanded stamina and leadership. I started speaking up in meetings, offering ideas, taking initiative, the kind of things I'd once been too timid to attempt. And I began dating cautiously at first. For so long, I believed no one could want someone like me. Someone with such visible flaws and physical limitations. But with my new posture and self-assurance, I realized I'd been wrong all along. My first real relationship was with Mark, a teacher I met in a continuing education class. He was kind and funny, and when I eventually told him about my surgery and my family's choices, he was stunned. Your parents actually postponed your surgery? He asked, eyes wide. For a wedding? Not canceled, postponed, I said, using their words. Emily, that's the same thing when it comes to your health. You could have died. Hearing that from someone outside the situation was validating in a way I didn't expect. It confirmed what I had always known, that my parents' decision wasn't loving or practical, it was reckless and unconscionable. Mark's reaction helped me finally believe I hadn't been overdramatic or selfish. I had been fighting for my life while my family fought for a party. That relationship lasted about 8 months before we realized we were better off as friends, but it had already done its job. It showed me that I was lovable and desirable, back issues and family baggage included. Around that same time, I also started therapy with Dr. Rebecca Chun to help me untangle the complicated feelings I still carried about my family. I had thought I was handling everything well, but I was carrying more anger and hurt than I realized. It's normal to feel betrayed, Dr. Chun told me during one of our sessions. Your parents were supposed to protect you, and instead they put you in danger for someone else's benefit. That's a profound violation of the parent-child relationship. But they're still my parents, I said. I love them even though I'm angry at them. Love and boundaries aren't mutually exclusive, she replied. You can love someone and still protect yourself from their poor decisions. These sessions helped me see that the dysfunction in my family went far deeper than the surgery incident. Favoritism and enablement had always been there. Rachel cast as the golden child who could do no wrong, and me expected to be the responsible one who understood, adapted, and carried the weight of everyone else's needs. The surgery had simply been the most extreme example of this dynamic, the moment when their favoritism nearly killed me. It wasn't an isolated event, but the culmination of decades of unequal treatment. The contrast between my flourishing life and my family's collapse was plain to see. At the few family gatherings I still attended, the tension was thick in the air. Rachel looked worn down and anxious, always preoccupied with money and David's job search, while my parents seemed smaller, diminished by the loss of their home and financial stability. But the most dramatic moment came at Christmas dinner, nearly a year after my surgery. We were at Karen's house. She had taken over hosting after my parents lost theirs, and she had flown in from California, decorating the place beautifully and cooking an elaborate meal. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The so-called black sheep was the only one capable of bringing the family together. Rachel had been making little digs all night about how some people had family who could bail them out when times were tough, clearly aimed at me and Karen. She was jealous that I had recovered so well, and that Karen was doing far better than our parents. Finally, while we were clearing dessert plates, Rachel snapped. "It must be nice to have rich relatives who can just write checks whenever you need them," she said, glaring at me. "Some of us actually have to work for what we get." Karen set her coffee cup down with a sharp clink. "Excuse me. I'm just saying Emily got everything handed to her. Surgery paid for, recovery support, the whole deal. Meanwhile, Marcus and I are struggling, and Mom and Dad lost their house and nobody seems to care." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see Karen's jaw tighten, and I knew she was about to let loose something she had been holding back for months. "Rachel," Karen said, her voice calm but edged like steel, "do you want to know exactly what Emily got handed to her?" "Karen, don't," I said quickly, but she was already on her feet. "No, Emily. It's time they all knew the truth." She turned to Rachel, her eyes blazing. "Emily didn't get anything handed to her. She nearly died because your parents chose to pay for your wedding instead of her life-saving surgery." Rachel went pale. It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," Karen shot back. "Your parents had money set aside for her surgery. Money specifically saved for a medical emergency that could have killed her if delayed. But when you wanted money for your fairy tale wedding, they gave you her surgery fund instead." Mom started to protest. "It was just a postponement." "It was a death sentence." Karen cut her off, her voice rising. "Dr. Hayes told Emily her condition was worsening rapidly. Every single month of delay meant more risk of cardiac arrest, surgical failure, or permanent paralysis. But none of you cared about that because Rachel wanted her perfect Italian wedding." Dad was staring down at his hands. "We didn't know it was that serious." "You didn't want to know," Linda shot back. "Emily tried to explain the risks, but you brushed her off because her reality was inconvenient. You were willing to gamble with your daughter's life for a party." Rachel was crying now. "We didn't know." "You didn't care to know," Linda corrected sharply. "And when Emily found another way to cover her surgery, when I mortgaged my house to save her life, none of you even thanked me. None of you acknowledged that I had to do what her own parents wouldn't." The room was silent except for Rachel's quiet sobs. I stared at Linda in shock, my chest tightening. "You mortgaged your house?" I whispered. She turned toward me, her face softening. "Of course I did, honey. You're my niece and you were dying. Someone had to be willing to risk something real to save you." Tears slid down my cheeks. All this time I thought she had spare money, but I hadn't realized she had put her own stability on the line for me. Linda turned back to my parents and Rachel. "The difference is that I was willing to risk my home to save a life. You were willing to risk yours for a party. And when that gamble collapsed, you expected the same person who saved Emily to rescue you too." Rachel was sobbing openly now. "I didn't know, I didn't understand." "You understood perfectly," Linda snapped. "You just didn't care. Emily's life was less important to you than your wedding photos and your Italian honeymoon." David, who had been silent the whole night, finally muttered, "Maybe we should go." "Yes, you should," Linda agreed. "And while you're reflecting on how unfair life has been, remember that Emily spent 25 years in constant pain, struggling to breathe, facing the prospect of dying young. When she finally had a chance at a normal life, her own family tried to take it away from her." Rachel and David grabbed their coats and slipped out without another word. My parents followed soon after, Linda's words still heavy in the air. Later that night, Linda and I sat in her living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly in the dark. "You mortgaged your house for me," I said finally. She gave a little shrug. I'd do it again without hesitation. You're alive, you're strong, and you're happy. That's worth any risk. How are the payments? I asked quietly. Manageable, she said. My current project is steady, and I refinanced at a better rate last month. Unlike your parents, I actually prepared for the commitment before I made it. I let out a shaky laugh, wiping at my eyes. I can't believe they expected you to bail them out after everything. That's the thing, Linda said. People like your parents and Rachel never learn because they never face consequences. Someone always swoops in to fix their mess. That's why they felt comfortable risking your life. They assumed someone else would catch you if it all fell apart. And someone did. I did. Because you deserve to be saved. But their foreclosure? That's not a tragedy, Emily. That's justice. We sat together in peaceful silence, watching the lights glow on the tree. I thought about how different my life was compared to a year ago. Not just my body but my spirit. I had learned to value myself enough to seek help when my own parents turned their backs. I had learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you most will sacrifice you the quickest when it suits them. But I had also learned what real love looks like. The kind that doesn't keep score, doesn't come with strings, and doesn't expect repayment. Linda had given me that kind of love, and it had literally saved my life. That Christmas changed everything between us all. Rachel and I didn't speak for months afterward, but when we finally did, she was different. She had done some soul-searching, and for the first time, she seemed to truly grasp the weight of what had happened. I was so focused on my wedding that I convinced myself your surgery was just routine. Rachel admitted during our first real conversation after that Christmas. I made it all about me and my needs, and I nearly cost you your life. I don't know how to live with that. It wasn't a full reconciliation, too much had happened for that, but it was a beginning. She started therapy to work through her manipulative patterns and her constant need to be the center of attention. And she even began sending Karen $25 a month as a gesture toward repayment. It wasn't much, but it meant something. My parents took longer. They spent nearly a year insisting it had just been a financial mistake, that everyone was being too harsh, that they hadn't really done anything wrong. It wasn't until Dad had a minor heart attack, brought on by stress according to his doctor, that they finally started facing the truth. I keep thinking about what Karen said. Mom told me in one of our halting phone calls that we gambled with your life for a party. I never thought about it like that. How did you think about it? I asked. She sighed. I guess I didn't think about it at all. Rachel cried too, telling me, you always seemed strong enough to handle a postponement. I took the easy path instead of the right one. That admission was more than I ever expected from her. And it was something. Dad's recovery was made harder by the guilt he finally allowed himself to feel. During one visit, he broke down completely, clutching my hand. I failed you. I was supposed to protect you, and instead I nearly killed you over money. What kind of father does that? The kind who learns from it and does better. I told him softly because despite everything I still loved him. The kind who makes sure it never happens again. 3 years have passed since my surgery, and my life is unrecognizable in the best ways. I'm engaged to a wonderful man named Daniel who loves me for exactly who I am. Straight spine and all. I've been promoted to manage the entire technical services department at our library system, a role I never thought I'd have the strength or confidence to take on. Karen and I travel together every year, and she has become more like a second mother to me than just an aunt. My parents now live modestly after losing the house, but in some ways they seem lighter. They volunteer at a food bank, budget carefully, and have embraced simplicity. Dad even started therapy to work through his lifelong habits of favoritism and enabling. Rachel and David are steadier too. He found a new job, not as lucrative but reliable, and together they've learned to find happiness in simple, affordable things rather than chasing extravagant dreams. Rachel still stumbles over her old sense of entitlement, but she catches herself now and makes an effort to change course. The greatest transformation, though, has been in me. I learned that I'm worth fighting for, even if the people who should have fought for me didn't. I learned that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. My parents' decision to prioritize Rachel's wedding over my surgery backfired in every possible way. They assumed someone else would clean up their mess as always, but this time the cost was their home, their savings, and the trust of their daughter. They gambled with my life and lost, but in losing they gained something they'd never had before. Perspective, humility, and a chance to rebuild with honesty. And me? I gained everything. My health, my strength, my confidence, and a clear vision of what real love looks like. I'm alive, thriving, and surrounded by people who would never ask me to sacrifice my life for their convenience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't something you plan. It's simply living well in spite of those who tried to hold you back. And trust me, I am living very, very well.